All right, everybody. Hope you're all doing well. This is episode 2 of Camper 6.0. And as you guys can see, in episode 1, we made the floor. And I used that specific, I guess you can call it like a composite technique of combining 1/4-inch ply sandwiched over a 1.5-inch XPS or extruded polystyrene foam and board insulation and glued all together. That produced a real rigid floor. The vertical sides of the tub, and keep in mind this is the part that will slide in the bed of the pickup truck, is just 3/4-inch ply. Now what I chose to use here was just some construction grade stuff. It's not finished grade stuff. And my reasoning will be is, as you guys will see later, I will take just automotive Bondo. I'll fill in the various screw holes, imperfections, knots, things like that. And then this whole bottom tub, including the bottom of the floor down here, will be painted black with that same roll-on bed liner product that we used for the exterior of 5.0. And essentially I've used a bed liner product on the tubs of all of my campers all the way from the first one. So it works out really well. So with all that being said, having nice pretty plywood is not necessarily necessary, is not necessary. It does assist a little bit with prep work, but largely I'm not concerned with it. This plywood was available and it was cost effective. So as you guys can see, I essentially attached these vertical sides to the perimeter of the camper, and I also boxed in what will be the outdoor kitchen area. Now, as far as attaching these, if you guys recall, down here at the floor, I had a 2-inch thickness, so a glue seam, and I used hardwood. So I essentially just screwed these vertical sides directly to that 2-inch side right there, and that gave a real nice platform for a good glue joint. And I used just traditional Titebond 3 or any wood glue, and it also helped align these very straight. The rear panel is also 3/4, and that's just sandwiched in between, and I glued and screwed it using the side of this of the side running vertical side here. And what you guys will see, let me show you a few things here, is around the perimeter of this one you can see some pocket holes that were drilled in. Now I will be working on the top here, which will be the wing portion and part of the portion that will extend into the interior of the camper. Believe it or not, I found that the floor material, that being the 1/4-inch ply on top and bottom sandwiched over the 1.5-inch XPS, will hold pocket screws a little bit. Now, I wouldn't trust it from a reliability standpoint. However, when I do put that top on there, I will use glue, of course, on all the seams, and I will use weight, but I will also very gently screw in a couple pocket hole screws around the entire perimeter just to hold it in place and give it just a little extra strength there. But keep in mind, screwing those pocket holes into that composite form there is not as strong as using a solid piece of wood, but nonetheless it will work. Now, I will show this as I build it in time lapse, but the actual top portion of that will be the wings and part of the interior component of the camper will also be using that same composite technique. All right, so just keep an eye out for the time lapse on that. All right, guys, what you can see here is I am cutting the pieces that will function as an angled support immediately toward the front and the sides of those vertical sides for the bed rail. As something I didn't note is that those bed rails are going to be 21.5 inches tall, and that will accommodate the extra height of the bed rails of typical pickup trucks. All right, guys. So what you see here is a quick mock-up of the size of what I need for what I call the wings, or the portion that will extend over the bed truck. Now, there's quite a bit of discussion to be had on where I'm going with this, but before I go too far, you guys probably immediately notice some asymmetry between what would be the driver's side or the left side versus the right side. For those who've watched and checked out my previous camper builds, you knew that in the last two, I actually favored a sleeping arrangement to where the main sleeping area is actually in the main cab of the camper and not necessarily in the cab over. And that was, that's a very personal choice. I've slept in the cab over a number of times and it was fine. However, I just preferred to sleep in the main cab area of the camper, and that was just a preference. So it also created this great opportunity to have kind of I call it like an L-shaped couch shape, to have a lot of very comfortable lounging in the main cab. So essentially that left side that's wider will be a big flat area that will have cushions, one of the sleeping areas / lounging areas of the camper. And that's something I've done in the last couple, and I really like it. I think it's a pretty interesting way. But all right, so let's move on. I've talked about this on the channel before, but somebody had illustrated one time to me what makes the difference between an engineer and somebody who just builds something. And the analogy that was given was building a workbench. And essentially the statement was anybody can build a workbench that's strong enough if they just overbuild it. But what an engineer is able to do is to calculate and bring some sort of object or building or whatever it is of the topic to the very extreme, the very far end of using the least amount of material yet being strong enough. And the main advantage and idea of that illustration was that making something strong enough is not necessarily always the hard part. It's doing it in a way to where you use the least amount of materials, which in the case of building a camper allows us to build a light camper, which is very important. But it also can have a reduction in material cost if you use less materials and so forth. So to that lesson that somebody explained to me, it always stuck with me. And I'm not an engineer or anything, but it still resonated with me, and I fully understood it. So as I've talked about many times, one of the main reasons I build these campers is the ability to be creative, to do stuff that not everyone else has done. Yes, there is a practical aspect to building these, but each one of these is like a piece of art to me, in the sense that I get to be creative, I get to try new things, and that's what I really enjoy. Not only to push the aesthetic limits, but push the limits of functionality for these little campers. So these wings, I'm going to try something new. I'm going to kind of extend outside of my comfort zone. And if you guys recall from most of the previous camper builds, the wings were essentially a torsion box. They were 1/2-inch ply, top and bottom, sandwiched over some form of insulation and then boxed in. Really, in many regards, not all that different than how we made the floor in this camper. However, the big and key difference is on the previous wings, I used 1/2-inch ply, which means per wing, a total of 1 inch extra of plywood. For this one, just as I did with the floor, I'm just going to use the 1/4 inch on the bottom and the top and sandwich it over some insulation. And I think it will work, but this is kind of the point of pushing the limits, is I can't guarantee it'll work. I feel good enough about it that I'm going to move on, but there is a realistic possibility that I may construct this and have to restart. But I guess, though, as if you want to take this into a bigger discussion of philosophy of life, isn't that what life is all about, right? If you can always do the safe thing and you'll always get same results, sometimes you can make a risk and it could not work out well for you, or sometimes you can take a risk and that will be the next innovation that brings in something new that you wouldn't have otherwise been to do. So here I'm cutting the pieces of wood that will run across the 1/4 inch pieces that you see laying out on the camper now, and form kind of an internal structure that the 1.5 thick insulation, XPS insulation, will fit inside of. So these boards will just add a point to where things can attach to them, but they'll also define and hold together the overall shape of what will be the wing structure. Now I'm using cedar here, so it's a real light wood, not the strongest wood in the world, but combined together, it will be enough strength. All right, guys, so we are going to stop episode 2 of Camper 6.0 build here. So what you are looking at here, though, is what will be the monolithic platform that sits on top of the tub and encompasses the wing portion of the camper, essentially the piece that extends over the bed rails. Above this point, upwards, will be the main structure that forms the body of the camper that you see protruding above the bed of the truck. Now, right now, this monolithic piece is loose. I don't have it bolted down. And as I talked about before, this top portion here is a new way that I'm building it, different than I have in any of the other previous camper builds. It's going to be built in a very similar fashion that the floor would be. So all of those voids are going to be filled with the 1.5 inch thick XPS insulation. I will I will perforate the insulation with that special tool I showed you at the end of last video to give it more surface area. And then I will put the Great Stuff foam in there. I'll probably spread it out a little bit and use a little bit less. And I will fill all of those voids. And then on top of this, I will actually bolt on, or I will screw on, another 1/4 inch sheet. So it will essentially be this one big monolithic, roughly C-clamp shaped piece for this top. Now, the advantage of using this sandwich technique, or this kind of like a structural insulated panel technique, is it will allow me to keep this top part lighter. Typically in the last builds, I talked about this, I used 2 1/2 inch sheets for the top and bottom and essentially did something very similar. Here, I'm only going to use the 1/4 inch sheets. And I decided to make the whole piece one monolithic piece to hopefully make it strong enough. So I believe this is going to work and this is going to be strong enough. And if it does work out as I anticipate, this will be one more advancement in the in-game camper builds to try to keep them lighter. So guys, we'll end this here. I appreciate you guys watching. Next week, I will actually sandwich the other piece on top, and we will move on to the actual framing of the camper. Now, from this image, it's not super clear, but it's a little bit clear. I also did something unique with the shape of this top platform. In the comments, if let's see if somebody can kind of figure out where I'm going with that. And this will define the overall shape of the camper along the sidewalls. Make note in the comments just for fun to see if you guys can see what's going on. And I'll also discuss that next week. As always, like, share, and subscribe. And as I had noted in a previous video, I've actually started a new channel, which I will have linked up in the primary comment of this video, called Vegas Underground, where I talk about unrelated topics, but it'd be a big support to me if you guys could go over and subscribe. So thanks again for watching. I'll see you for episode 3 next week.